The blood-red sunset painted the horizon as Rebecca Carter staggered through the doorway of the small homestead, her nightgown soaked with sweat and the waters of her broken labor. She had been alone for hours, her husband Henry Nelson having ridden out at dawn to fetch the doctor from Laramie, Wyoming Territory, but neither had returned. The year was 1875, and in this unforgiving frontier, time and distance became cruel enemies to a woman in childbirth. "Henry," she whispered, clutching the doorframe as another contraction tore through her body. Her knees buckled and she slid to the rough wooden floor, her auburn hair plastered to her face. The baby was coming, whether the doctor made it or not. Miles away, Henry Nelson spurred his horse desperately across the open plains toward Laramie. At 32, he had faced outlaws and survived harsh winters, but nothing terrified him more than leaving his young wife alone. The 24-year-old Rebecca was strong, but this was their first child, and the nearest neighbor was over 5 miles away. "Faster, Thunder," he urged his stallion, his weather-beaten face creased with worry beneath his wide-brimmed hat. The doctor had been called to another homestead, and precious hours had been lost tracking him down. Now, as the sun began to set, Henry knew with growing dread that he might not make it back in time. Rebecca labored alone through the night, her screams echoing in the empty cabin. When dawn broke, she delivered a stillborn son into her trembling hands. Exhausted and hemorrhaging, she cradled the tiny blue body against her chest, tears streaming down her face as she whispered promises and apologies to the child who would never draw a breath. That was how Henry found her when he finally returned with Dr. Maxwell, covered in blood and clutching their lifeless child. The doctor worked frantically to stop Rebecca's bleeding, but by midday, he pulled Henry aside with grave news. "I've done all I can," Dr. Maxwell said, his voice heavy. "She's lost too much blood. I don't expect she'll make it through the night. I'm sorry, son." Henry's world collapsed around him. In a single day, he had lost both his son and was losing his beloved Rebecca. He sat beside her, holding her cold hand as her breathing grew more labored. Her eyes fluttered open briefly, recognition dawning. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Our boy." "You have nothing to be sorry for," Henry choked, pressing his forehead to hers. "Nothing at all." She died as the sun was setting, exactly 24 hours after she had first felt the pains of labor begin. Henry buried them together on the hill behind their homestead, his son wrapped in Rebecca's arms. He stood there long after the doctor had left, staring at the fresh mound of earth until the stars appeared in the vast Wyoming sky. The days that followed passed in a fog. Neighbors came with food and condolences, but Henry barely acknowledged them. He worked the land mechanically, tended the animals, and drank himself to sleep each night. The cabin that had once been filled with Rebecca's laughter and dreams of their future family now echoed with emptiness. 2 weeks after the funeral, Henry rode into Laramie for supplies. The small but growing town was bustling with activity. The railroad had brought new settlers and commerce, making it a vital stop along the Union Pacific line. He tied Thunder outside the general store and stepped inside, his eyes downcast, avoiding the pitying glances of townsfolk who knew of his tragedy. "Mr. Nelson," Mrs. Sullivan, the shopkeeper's wife, approached him cautiously. "I heard about your loss. I'm so sorry." Henry nodded stiffly. "Thank you, madam. Just need some coffee and flour." "Of course." She hesitated. "Have you heard about the situation at the miller's place? Their wagon was attacked by bandits on their way from Colorado. Mr. Miller was killed and his wife died just yesterday after giving birth. The doctor's been caring for their baby boy, but the poor thing needs a wet nurse." Henry barely registered her words, mechanically placing coins on the counter for his supplies. "It's a shame," Mrs. Sullivan continued, wrapping the flour. "Doctor Maxwell says without someone to nurse him, the infant won't survive long on cow's milk alone." Henry froze, something stirring in his grief-numbed mind. "Where is the doctor now?" "At his office with the child, I believe. Been there since the mother passed." Henry left his purchases on the counter and walked briskly to the doctor's office at the end of the main street. The small wooden building with its painted sign had been his destination of desperate hope just 2 weeks earlier. He pushed open the door to find Dr. Maxwell looking haggard, a small bundle in his arms. "Henry," the doctor said, surprised. "What brings you here?" "Mrs. Sullivan told me about the Miller baby," Henry said, his voice rough from disuse. "No one to care for him," Dr. Maxwell sighed, gently rocking the fussing infant. "No family that we know of. They were just passing through on their way to Oregon. I've sent telegrams, but—" He let the sentence hang in the air. "He's hungry. Been trying to get him to take sugar water and cow's milk, but it's not enough." Henry approached slowly and looked down at the red-faced infant. Something twisted painfully in his chest. What will happen to him without a wet nurse? I don't like to say it, but his chances aren't good. There's a widow in Cheyenne who might take him, but that's 3 days' ride, and I'm not sure he'll make it. Henry swallowed hard. "I'll take him." "You?" Dr. Maxwell's eyebrows shot up. "Henry, I understand your loss, but a man alone can't—" "Not just me," Henry interrupted. "There's a woman who lives near the Sioux settlement about 10 miles from my place. Rose Clearwater, half Sioux, half white. She lost her baby a month ago but might still be able to nurse. I'll take him to her." Dr. Maxwell studied Henry's face carefully. "Are you sure about this?" "It's not your responsibility. No child should die if there's a chance to save them," Henry said firmly, the first clear thought he'd had since Rebecca's death. "I couldn't save my son, but maybe." The doctor nodded slowly. "All right. But you'll need to know how to care for him until you reach this woman." He spent the next hour teaching Henry how to mix a temporary feeding solution and how to wrap the baby securely for the journey. As the sun began its descent, Henry mounted Thunder with the infant carefully secured inside his coat against his chest. The small weight felt alien yet somehow right. "I've named him James," Dr. Maxwell called as Henry prepared to leave. "After his father." Henry nodded, touching the brim of his hat. "James it is, then. I'll send word when we reach Rose." The ride to Rose Clearwater's cabin was arduous. The baby fussed and cried, and Henry had to stop frequently to attempt feeding him the sugar-milk mixture the doctor had prepared. By nightfall, the child's cries had grown weaker, concerning Henry deeply. "Hold on, little one," he murmured, spurring Thunder faster through the darkness. Not much farther now. Rose Clearwater's cabin came into view just as the moon rose high in the sky. It was a small but sturdy structure, built against the shelter of a rock face with a thin trail of smoke rising from the chimney. Henry had met Rose only once, when he and Rebecca had traveled this way last year. She had been heavily pregnant then, married to a trapper who worked these hills. Rebecca had taken an immediate liking to the quiet, dignified woman with intelligent dark eyes. Henry dismounted carefully, keeping the baby close to his chest, and approached the cabin. A dog barked inside, and moments later, the door creaked open. Rose stood framed in the doorway, a rifle in her hands, her long black hair hanging loose over her shoulders. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice carrying in the night air. "It's Henry Nelson, madam, from the homestead south of here." She lowered the rifle slightly. "Mr. Nelson, what brings you here at this hour?" As Henry stepped into the light spilling from her doorway, the bundle in his arms gave a weak cry. Rose's eyes widened. "I need your help," Henry said simply. This child has no mother. He's hungry, and I remembered you had a baby. A shadow crossed Rose's face. My son died 4 weeks ago. Fever took him. She hesitated, then gestured toward the door. Come in. It's cold out there for an infant. The cabin interior was neat and warm, furnished sparsely but with evident care. A cradle sat empty near the fireplace, a small blanket still draped over its side. The sight made Henry's throat tighten. I'm sorry about your son, he said, standing awkwardly in the middle of the room. And I'm sorry to arrive like this, but the doctor said this baby won't survive without a wet nurse. Rose set the rifle against the wall and approached slowly. Let me see him. Henry carefully unwrapped James, revealing the small, red-faced infant whose cries had grown alarmingly faint. Rose's expression softened as she gently took him from Henry's arms. He's hungry, she murmured, moving to sit in a rocking chair near the fire. With practiced ease, she opened her blouse and brought the baby to her breast. After a moment of confusion, James latched on and began to nurse greedily. Henry turned away, giving her privacy, emotions churning within him. The relief that the baby might survive mingled with renewed grief for his own son who would never experience such basic comfort. Your wife, Rose said quietly after a few minutes. She had her baby. Henry nodded, his back still turned. She died. They both did. Silence fell between them, broken only by the soft sounds of the nursing baby and the crackle of the fire. I'm sorry, Rose finally said. It's a hard country for mothers. Yes. Henry cleared his throat. The doctor said you might be able to help, but I understand if you can't, if you'd rather not. Rose looked down at the nursing infant, her finger gently stroking his cheek. He needs milk. I have milk but no child to feed. She was quiet for a moment, then added, My husband isn't coming back. He left after our son died, said he couldn't bear to stay. Henry turned to face her, seeing the pain in her eyes despite her composed expression. At 27, Rose had already endured more than many people would in a lifetime. I can pay you, Henry offered, for your trouble. Rose shook her head. I don't want your money, but I can't raise another child alone out here. She met his gaze steadily. If I feed him, what then? It was a question Henry hadn't considered in his desperate race to save the baby's life. I don't know, he admitted. I only thought to get him here to keep him alive. Then we have tonight to decide, Rose said practically. He can stay with me tonight and you can rest. There's a pallet by the fire. Henry hesitated, then nodded gratefully. He was bone-tired, and the emotional weight of the past weeks pressed down on him like a physical burden. He unsaddled Thunder and made sure the horse was comfortable before returning to the cabin. Inside, Rose had placed James in the cradle and was preparing a simple meal of beans and cornbread. They ate in companionable silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Later, as Henry lay on the pallet near the fire, he watched Rose gently rock the cradle with her foot while she mended a shirt. The domestic scene stirred something in him, not happiness, not yet, but perhaps a recognition that life continued even after devastating loss. I could build onto my cabin, he said suddenly. Make a room for you and the baby. You could live there, care for him. I'd provide for you both. Rose's hand stilled. As your wife? No, Henry said quickly, then flushed. I mean not like that, as a arrangement for the baby's sake. Rose regarded him thoughtfully. A man and woman living together who aren't married would cause talk. I don't care about talk. I care about doing right by this child. Rose set her mending aside. Mr. Nelson, Henry, he corrected. Henry, she amended. I appreciate your concern for this orphan. It speaks well of your character. But what you propose isn't simple. What happens when he's weaned? Do I stay on as your housekeeper? Do I leave? And what of the child? Would he be yours or mine or neither? Her practical questions gave Henry pause. He hadn't thought beyond the immediate need to keep James alive. "I don't have all the answers," he admitted. "But I know I couldn't live with myself if I let this child die when there was a chance to save him." Rose's expression softened. "Nor could I." She glanced at the sleeping baby. "Let me make a different proposal. I will come to your homestead 3 times a day to nurse him. Morning, midday, and evening. This way there's no impropriety and the baby gets what he needs." It was a sensible solution, though the logistics would be challenging. "It's a 5-mile ride each way," Henry pointed out. "I have a horse," Rose replied, "and I'm a strong rider. It would give me purpose, which is something I've lacked since." She trailed off, her eyes drifting to the cradle. Henry nodded slowly. "All right, we can try it your way. I can come get you in the mornings and bring you back in the evenings at least." "That would be helpful," Rose acknowledged. "We'll begin tomorrow, then." With the immediate decision made, Henry felt some of the tension leave his body. As he drifted toward sleep, he found himself offering a silent prayer of thanks, the first prayer he'd said since burying Rebecca and their son. The arrangement began the next day. Henry rode with Rose to his homestead in the morning, the baby secured in a sling across her chest. The cabin was dusty and neglected, evidence of Henry's grief-stricken state. Rose said nothing but set about tidying up while nursing James. "I'll need to go back midday," she said as she prepared to leave. "He'll be hungry again." Henry nodded, carefully taking the now contented baby from her. "I'll manage until then." Caring for an infant proved more challenging than Henry had anticipated. James cried frequently, and Henry found himself at a loss for how to comfort him. He walked the floor, patted the tiny back, and sang off key fragments of songs he remembered from his own childhood. When Rose returned at midday, she found Henry looking frazzled, his hair standing on end. "He won't stop crying," Henry said desperately, passing the wailing infant to her. Rose's lips twitched in the ghost of a smile. "He's just hungry." She settled into the rocking chair Henry had built for Rebecca and began to nurse James. "How do you know what he needs?" Henry asked, watching in amazement as the baby immediately quieted. "Practice," Rose said simply. "And instinct. You'll learn." She paused, then added, "If you want to learn." The question lingered between them: what was Henry's role to be in this child's life? Guardian, father, caretaker. He didn't know himself. "I want to learn," he said finally. "Will you teach me?" Over the following weeks, a routine developed. Henry would fetch Rose in the mornings, she would stay through midday, then return in the evening with Henry escorting her home after sunset. Between feedings, Rose showed Henry how to change and bathe the baby, how to swaddle him properly, and how to recognize different cries. "This one means he's tired," she explained one afternoon as James fussed. "See how he rubs his eyes. And this cry, the sharp one, that's hunger." Henry watched and learned, his initial awkwardness gradually giving way to confidence. The cabin, too, was transformed. Rose cleaned thoroughly, arranged Rebecca's possessions respectfully, and made the place livable again. She began bringing vegetables from her garden, freshening the sparse meals Henry had been subsisting on. As spring warmed into summer, they expanded their arrangement. Rose would bring her mending or weaving and stay for longer periods. Sometimes she would help Henry with the lighter farm work while he watched James. The baby thrived under their shared care, growing plump and alert, his dark eyes tracking their movements around the cabin. Neighbors noticed, of course. Mrs. Peterson from the next homestead over-visited one afternoon, ostensibly to bring a pie but clearly curious about the arrangement. She raised her eyebrows at the sight of Rose nursing James on the porch. "I heard you took in that Miller orphan," she said to Henry, her tone carefully neutral. "Very Christian of you." "It was the right thing to do," Henry replied evenly. Mrs. Peterson glanced at Rose, who met her gaze calmly. And Miss Clearwater is helping. Mrs. Clearwater, Rose corrected softly. My husband is gone, but I am still married in name. Mrs. Clearwater has been kind enough to nurse James, Henry explained. We have an arrangement. I see. Mrs. Peterson's tone suggested she saw more than was there. Well, people are talking, you know. A man and woman not married, raising a child together. We're not raising him together, Henry said sharply. Mrs. Clearwater is providing what the baby needs, which I cannot. There's nothing improper about it. Mrs. Peterson sniffed. If you say so. Still, appearances matter out here, Mr. Nelson. After she left, an uncomfortable silence fell between Henry and Rose. She's right, Rose said finally. People will talk. Henry scowled. Let them. What matters is James has what he needs. Rose studied him thoughtfully. You've grown attached to him. It wasn't a question, and Henry didn't deny it. In the 3 months since he'd brought James home, the baby had become the center of his world. He found himself watching for new developments: the first smile, the stronger grip of tiny fingers around his thumb, the gurgling attempts at sounds that weren't quite words. I have, he admitted. I think of him as mine now. Rose nodded, her expression unreadable. That's natural. You've cared for him from the beginning. So have you, Henry pointed out. Rose looked down at James, now sleeping peacefully against her chest. Yes, she said softly, I have. The incident with Mrs. Peterson marked a turning point in their arrangement. The next day, Rose arrived with more of her belongings packed into saddlebags. I've been thinking, she said as Henry helped her unload. This back and forth isn't practical. James is growing, and soon he'll be on a more regular schedule. It makes more sense for me to stay here, at least until he's weaned. Henry blinked in surprise. Stay here, but your cabin can wait, Rose said firmly. It's not going anywhere. I can check on it weekly to make sure all is well. But what about? Henry gestured vaguely, uncomfortable with addressing the impropriety directly. Rose smiled faintly. I'll use your bedroom. You can make up a bed in the main room. That should satisfy propriety enough, even for Mrs. Peterson. It was a practical solution, and Henry found himself relieved at the thought of having Rose's steady presence full time. James was happier when she was around, and truthfully, so was Henry. All right, he agreed. If you're sure. I'm sure, Rose said, her dark eyes meeting his. It's what's best for James. As summer progressed, they fell into a comfortable domestic rhythm. Henry worked the fields and tended the livestock, while Rose cared for James and kept the household running. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch, watching the sunset while James cooed and babbled between them. One such evening, as fireflies began to dot the darkness, Henry found himself studying Rose's profile. The soft curve of her cheek, the straight line of her nose, the way her lips curved when she smiled at James's antics. She was beautiful in a quiet way that snuck up on a person. Tell me about your husband, he said suddenly. Rose stiffened slightly, then relaxed. Daniel was a trapper. A white man who respected the Sioux ways and was accepted by my mother's people. She paused, rocking James gently. He was a good man, but restless. When our son died, something broke in him. He said he couldn't stay where the memories were so fresh. You think he'll come back? Rose shook her head. No, before he left he said not to wait for him, that I should find happiness elsewhere if I could. Her voice held no bitterness, only a resigned acceptance. It's been 6 months. If he was coming back, he would have by now. Henry nodded, understanding the finality in her voice. Rebecca and I were married for 3 years, he offered in return. We came out here from Pennsylvania right after the war. I'd had enough of crowds and wanted open space. She must have loved you very much to follow you to such a hard place. "She did," Henry said softly. "And I loved her. I thought we'd grow old together, watching our children and grandchildren play on this land." Rose reached across the space between their chairs and briefly touched his hand. The gesture was simple but comforting. "Life rarely goes as planned," she said, "but sometimes it gives us new paths we never expected." Henry turned his hand over and caught her fingers before she could withdraw them. "Like James," he said, "like you." Rose's eyes widened slightly, but she didn't pull away. They sat like that for several moments, hands linked, until James began to fuss for his evening feeding. The moment passed, but something had shifted between them. Over the next few weeks, Henry found himself noticing Rose in new ways, the grace of her movements as she hung laundry, the melodious quality of her voice when she sang to James, the rare but bright sound of her laughter when the baby did something amusing. He caught her watching him sometimes, too, when she thought he wasn't looking. A quick glance away, a flush on her cheeks. It stirred feelings Henry had thought buried with Rebecca: interest, attraction, hope. James continued to thrive, reaching the milestones Dr. Maxwell mentioned during his monthly visits to check on the baby's progress. By late summer, he was sitting up on his own and beginning to show interest in solid foods. "He'll be crawling before you know it," the doctor remarked during one visit. "You've done well with him, both of you." After the doctor left, Henry found Rose in the vegetable garden, picking late summer tomatoes. James was napping in a basket nearby, shaded from the August sun. "Dr. Maxwell says James is doing exceptionally well," he said, kneeling to help her collect the ripe fruits. "Thanks to you." Rose smiled, wiping a strand of hair from her face, leaving a smudge of dirt on her cheek. "Thanks to both of us. You're good with him, Henry." Without thinking, Henry reached out and gently wiped the dirt from her cheek. Rose went still under his touch, her dark eyes meeting his. "Rose," he began, uncertain what he wanted to say but feeling the need to say something. "These past months—" A cry from the basket broke the moment. James was awake and demanding attention. Rose pulled back, the spell broken, and went to attend to the baby. That evening, after James was asleep, Henry found Rose sitting at the kitchen table, mending one of his shirts by lamplight. He poured 2 cups of coffee and sat across from her. "I've been thinking," he said carefully, "about the future." Rose's hand stilled on her mending. "What about it?" "James will be fully weaned soon. You said you'd stay until then." "Yes," Rose acknowledged. "That was our arrangement." Henry took a deep breath. "I don't want you to leave." Rose's eyes lifted to his, questioning but guarded. "Because of James, partly," Henry admitted. "He loves you. It would break his heart and mine if you left." He reached across the table, his hand palm up in invitation. "I care for you, Rose, more than I expected to care for anyone after Rebecca." Rose looked at his offered hand but didn't take it. "I care for you too, Henry, and for James. But I won't be your housekeeper or your children's nurse." "I'm not asking for that," Henry said earnestly. "I'm asking if you might consider a real future here, with me, as my wife." Rose's eyes widened in genuine surprise. "Wife? Henry, are you certain? I'm half Sioux." "People already talk. Let them talk," Henry interrupted firmly. "I don't care what anyone thinks but you and James." He hesitated, then added softly, "I know it's been less than a year since we both lost those we loved. I'm not suggesting we marry tomorrow, just consider the possibility. For all our sakes." Rose was quiet for a long moment, studying his face as if searching for doubt or insincerity. Finding none, she finally placed her hand in his. "I will consider it," she said softly. "That's all I can promise now." It was enough. Henry squeezed her hand gently, hope blooming in his chest for the first time in many months. The proposal, tentative as it was, changed things between them. There was a new awareness, a careful consideration in their interactions. Henry found himself wanting to court Rose properly, to show her that his feelings went beyond gratitude or convenience. He began bringing her small gifts from his trips to Laramie, ribbons for her hair, a jar of honey, a book of poetry. He took over more of James's care in the evenings, encouraging Rose to rest or pursue her weaving, which she sold occasionally to supplement their income. Rose, in turn, seemed to open up more. She taught Henry words in the Sioux language, shared stories of her childhood straddling two worlds, and began to speak more freely of her hopes and fears. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching a spectacular sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple, she told him of her deepest worry. "I don't know if I can have more children," she confessed quietly, her eyes on the distant horizon. "There were complications when my son was born. The midwife warned me it might be difficult to carry another child to term." Henry considered her words carefully. "That doesn't change anything for me," he said finally. "We already have James. If we're blessed with more children, I'll be grateful. If not, I'll still be grateful for the family we have." Rose turned to him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "You truly mean that?" "I do," Henry said simply, reaching for her hand. "Family isn't just about blood, Rose. It's about who you choose to love and care for." Rose's fingers tightened around his. "My people believe that," she said softly, "that the family of your heart can be as strong as the family of your blood." "Your people are wise, then," Henry replied, bringing her hand to his lips in a gentle kiss. It was their first true moment of intimacy, and though it was a small gesture, it felt momentous. Rose didn't pull away but instead leaned closer, until her head rested lightly against his shoulder. They sat that way until the stars came out, James sleeping peacefully in his cradle just inside the open door. Autumn came to Wyoming Territory in a blaze of gold and crimson. The days grew shorter, the nights cooler, and preparations for winter became urgent. Henry worked long hours harvesting the last of their crops and ensuring the cabin was properly sealed against the coming cold. Rose preserved vegetables, dried meat, and wove warm blankets in anticipation of the harsh weather. James, now nearly 8 months old, was crawling everywhere and beginning to pull himself up on furniture. His first tooth had appeared, reducing his nursing somewhat, though he still sought the comfort of Rose's breast several times a day. One crisp October morning, as frost sparkled on the grass, Rose announced she needed to check on her cabin. "It's been nearly a month," she said as she prepared to leave. "I should make sure everything is secure before the first snow." Henry frowned, looking at the sky. "Clouds are moving in." "Maybe we should all go make a day of it. I can help with any repairs." Rose smiled at the suggestion. "That would be nice. James would enjoy the ride." They bundled up warmly, securing James in a carrier on Henry's back, and set out on horseback for Rose's cabin. The ride was pleasant, with James babbling happily and pointing at birds overhead. When they crested the final hill, however, Rose suddenly reined in her horse, her posture stiffening. "What's wrong?" Henry asked, following her gaze to the small cabin in the distance. "There's smoke," Rose said tensely. "Someone's there." Henry instinctively moved his horse in front of hers. "Stay here with James, I'll check it out." "No," Rose said firmly, "it's my home." They approached cautiously together, Henry keeping one hand near the revolver at his hip. As they drew closer, a figure emerged from the cabin, a tall man with a full beard, dressed in buckskins and a fur hat. Rose gasped softly. "Daniel!" The man turned at the sound of her voice, his weathered face breaking into a surprised smile. "Rose, I was beginning to think you'd moved on." His eyes shifted to Henry and the baby on his back, and the smile faltered. They dismounted, an awkward tension filling the air. "Daniel," Rose said again, her voice carefully controlled. "You've been gone 8 months." "I know," he said, removing his hat in a gesture of contrition. "I needed time, losing our boy." He trailed off, then seemed to gather himself. "But I'm back now, for good if you'll have me." Henry stood silently, acutely aware of the baby on his back and the sudden complication to what had seemed, just hours ago, a straightforward path forward. This was Rose's husband, returned from his grief-stricken wanderings. Henry had no claim on her, not really, despite the understanding that had been growing between them. Rose looked between the two men, her expression unreadable. "We should talk," she said finally to Daniel. "But first, introductions. Daniel, this is Henry Nelson. Henry, my husband, Daniel Clearwater." The men exchanged stiff nods. "And the little one?" Daniel asked, gesturing to James, who was peering curiously over Henry's shoulder. "This is James," Rose said simply. "An orphan we've been caring for." Daniel's eyebrows rose at the "we," but he didn't comment directly. "Let's go inside," he suggested instead. "It's getting colder." The cabin was warm from the fire Daniel had built, but the atmosphere inside was anything but comfortable. They sat awkwardly around the small table, James now on Rose's lap, happily playing with a wooden spoon. "So," Daniel began, looking between them, "you two have been caring for this child together." "Yes," Henry said, seeing no reason to dissemble. "James's mother died in childbirth. His father was killed before that. Rose has been nursing him since my wife." He paused, the familiar pain of loss surfacing briefly. "My wife and son died during childbirth as well," understanding dawned in Daniel's eyes. "I see." He turned to Rose. "So you've been living at Mr. Nelson's place, caring for this baby?" Rose met his gaze steadily. "Yes, James needed me." "And now," Daniel asked pointedly, "does he still need you? He looks to be weaning age." "He does still need me," Rose said firmly. "We've become a family, the three of us." Daniel's expression hardened slightly. "A family, Rose, I'm your husband." "A husband who left," Rose replied, her voice low but intense. "Who told me not to wait for him? I mourned you, Daniel, as surely as if you had died." The tension in the room was palpable. Henry stood, uncomfortable with being present for what clearly needed to be a private conversation. "I should take James outside," he said awkwardly. "Give you two some privacy." Rose caught his hand briefly as he reached for James. The touch was fleeting, but conveyed volumes: uncertainty, apology, and something deeper that gave Henry both hope and heartache. Outside, Henry walked with James in the crisp autumn air, pointing out birds and squirrels to distract both the baby and himself from worrying about the conversation happening inside the cabin. James, oblivious to the adult complications, giggled and reached for falling leaves. "Whatever happens," Henry murmured to the baby, "I'll make sure you're cared for, I promise." It was nearly an hour before the cabin door opened and Rose emerged. Her face was composed, but Henry could see she had been crying. Daniel followed, his expression grim but resigned. "Henry," Rose called softly. "Can we talk?" Henry approached cautiously, James now sleeping against his chest. "I've explained everything to Daniel," Rose said, glancing at her husband. "About James, about our arrangement, about the understanding between us." Daniel nodded stiffly. "Rose has made her choice clear. I left her, told her not to wait. I can't blame her for taking me at my word." He turned to Rose, his expression softening slightly. "I still love you, but I understand. You've built something here with them." Henry felt a surge of conflicting emotions: relief, sympathy for Daniel's obvious pain, and overwhelming gratitude toward Rose. "I'm sorry," he said to Daniel, and meant it. "I know what it is to lose someone you love." Daniel nodded in acknowledgement. "Take care of her," he said gruffly. "And the boy?" He turned to Rose one last time, touching her cheek gently. "Be happy, little dear. That's all I've ever wanted for you." With that, he collected his few belongings and mounted his horse. They watched him ride away until he disappeared over the ridge. In the silence that followed, Henry turned to Rose questioningly. "Are you sure he's your husband? You could have gone with him." Rose shook her head, reaching for James and cradling him close. "I'm where I belong, with you, with James." She looked up at Henry, her dark eyes clear and certain. "If your offer still stands," Henry's heart swelled. "It does," he said, drawing her into an embrace that included James between them. "It always will." They returned to Henry's homestead that evening, the ride quiet but comfortable, filled with unspoken promise. The first snowflakes began to fall as they reached the cabin, dusting Rose's hair like stars against the night sky. As Henry helped her down from her horse, he held her a moment longer than necessary, their breath mingling in the cold air. "I love you," he said simply, the words he'd been holding back for months finally finding voice. "I didn't expect to, but I do." Rose's smile was like sunrise after the longest night. "And I love you," she replied, standing on tiptoe to press a soft kiss to his lips. "Both of you." As winter settled over Wyoming Territory, the small homestead became a haven of warmth and new beginnings. By December, Rose had filed for divorce based on abandonment, a process that would take time but which Daniel had agreed not to contest. Dr. Maxwell visited regularly, remarking on James's continued good health and development. "He's a lucky boy," the doctor said during one visit as James toddled unsteadily between Henry and Rose. "To have found such loving parents. The words settled comfortably around them, acknowledging what had been true for months. Christmas brought heavy snow that isolated the homestead for days, but they had each other and supplies enough to celebrate the holiday in simple comfort. Henry carved a wooden horse for James, while Rose wove a new blanket in rich earth tones. For each other, their gifts were more personal. Henry gave Rose a silver locket containing a lock of James's hair, while Rose presented Henry with a beaded medicine pouch in the Sioux tradition, meant to protect the wearer. "My mother would have approved of you," she told him as he admired the intricate beadwork. "A man who values family above all else." On New Year's Eve, as James slept soundly and the fire cast golden light throughout the cabin, Henry took Rose's hands in his. "I know we can't marry yet, not legally," he said. "But in my heart, you're already my wife. I don't want to wait to begin our life together fully." Rose's eyes shimmered in the firelight. "Nor do I." That night, they shared Henry's bed for the first time, their coming together both tender and passionate, a consummation of the love that had grown between them through shared grief and joy, through caring for a child who had brought them together in the most unexpected way. Spring arrived with renewal, both literal and symbolic. The paperwork for Rose's divorce was finally processed, leaving her free to marry. James's first birthday was celebrated with neighbors who had gradually accepted the unconventional family, won over by Rose's grace and Henry's obvious devotion to both her and the boy. They were married in May 1876 in a small ceremony in Laramie, with James Tottle walking down the aisle ahead of Rose, much to the delight of the assembled guests. Dr. Maxwell stood as Henry's best man, while one of Rose's cousins from the Sioux settlement came to support her. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister declared, and Henry kissed his bride as James clapped his hands in delight. The celebration afterward was modest but joyful, with even Mrs. Peterson offering sincere congratulations. "You've made a fine family," she admitted to Henry. "Sometimes the Lord works in mysterious ways." "That he does," Henry agreed, watching Rose dance with James in her arms, her laughter carrying across the town square. That summer brought another blessing. Rose, who had feared she might never conceive again, discovered she was with child. The news filled the homestead with cautious joy and renewed purpose. Henry expanded the cabin, adding a proper second bedroom and a larger kitchen. The garden was doubled in size, and a milk cow was purchased to ensure adequate nutrition for their growing family. "It's a girl," Rose declared with certainty as her belly swelled. "I can feel it, different from my son or from James." Henry didn't question her intuition, secretly pleased at the thought of a daughter with Rose's dark eyes and quiet strength. The pregnancy progressed without the complications Rose had feared. Dr. Maxwell visited regularly, pronouncing both mother and baby healthy. James, now nearly 2, seemed to understand something important was happening. He would pat Rose's growing belly gently and say "baby" in his developing vocabulary. As Rose's time drew near, Henry made preparations with a thoroughness born of past tragedy. The doctor agreed to stay at the homestead for the week around Rose's expected delivery, and a midwife from the Sioux settlement was invited as well, honoring Rose's heritage and providing additional skilled assistance. The labor began on a warm September evening, while James was already asleep. Unlike the frantic, isolated experience of Rebecca's delivery, Rose was surrounded by the doctor, the midwife, and Henry, who refused to leave her side despite traditional customs that would have banished him from the birthing room. "You belong here," Rose told him between contractions, gripping his hand fiercely. "We do this together." The labor was long but progressing normally. By dawn, Rose was fully dilated and beginning to push. Henry supported her back, whispering encouragement as she worked to bring their child into the world. Outside the window, the sun rose in a spectacular display of color, as if nature itself was celebrating the impending birth. With a final, powerful push, Rose delivered their daughter, a healthy, robust baby girl with a shock of dark hair and a lusty cry that spoke of strong lungs and a determined spirit. "She's perfect," Dr. Maxwell announced, placing the newborn on Rose's chest. "Absolutely perfect." Henry stared in wonder at the tiny life they had created together, tears streaming unashamedly down his face. The midwife, a wizened woman named Singing Sparrow, nodded in approval. "Strong medicine in this one," she pronounced. "She will bring healing." They named her Rebecca Rose Nelson, honoring both the past and the present. When James was brought in to meet his sister, his face lit with wonder. "Baby," he said, reaching out a careful finger to touch her cheek. "My baby." "That's right," Henry told him, gathering his son into his arms. "Your sister." Family. As Rose nursed their newborn daughter with James cuddled against her side, Henry was overcome with gratitude for the journey that had brought them here, a journey that had begun in unimaginable loss, but had led to this moment of perfect joy. The following years brought continued blessings to the Nelson family. The homestead prospered, with Henry eventually purchasing adjacent land to expand their operations. James grew into a strong, thoughtful boy who inherited Henry's work ethic and Rose's quiet dignity. Little Rebecca, nicknamed Becky, was joined 2 years later by a brother they named Daniel Thomas, in acknowledgement of both their pasts. Occasionally, news would reach them of Daniel Clearwater. He had remarried, a widow with children of her own, and settled in Montana Territory. Once, he sent a letter with a gift of a hand-carved flute for James, acknowledging the boy he might have helped raise under different circumstances. On James's 10th birthday, Henry and Rose sat him down to tell him the full story of his origins, how he had come to them as an orphaned newborn, how Rose had nursed him when she had lost her own child, and how he had brought healing to their broken hearts. "So I'm not really your son." James asked, his young face serious. "You are really our son," Henry corrected firmly. "In every way that matters. Family isn't just about blood, remember. It's about love and choice. We chose you and you chose us from the very beginning." James considered this, then nodded slowly. "Can I still call you Pa and Ma, always?" Rose said, embracing him. "Until the stars fall from the sky." That night, as Henry and Rose sat on the porch of their expanded home, watching their 3 children play in the twilight, Henry marveled at how life could change in unexpected ways. "If anyone had told me 5 years ago that I would be sitting here with you with 3 beautiful children, I wouldn't have believed it possible," he said, taking Rose's hand in his. Rose squeezed his fingers, her dark eyes reflecting the first evening stars. "Out of great loss can come great joy if we're brave enough to open our hearts again." "I thank God every day that you were brave enough," Henry said softly. "That we both were." As darkness fell across the Wyoming plains and their children's laughter echoed in the cooling air, Henry Nelson knew with absolute certainty that he had found his true home not in a place, but in the hearts of the family that fate, tragedy, and love had brought together. In the years to come, their story would be told and retold among the settlers of Laramie, and beyond the tale of a cowboy who lost his wife and child, a woman who lost her baby but could nurse his orphaned son, and how together they built something beautiful from the ashes of heartbreak. It was a story of the Wild West at its most essential, not just a tale of survival against harsh elements and circumstances, but of the enduring power of love to heal even the deepest wounds.